If I'm
There
pressing
you
go.
go. Well, it's technically it's 9:10 anyway,
Yeah.
so we should be
So I
going.
think we should go ahead and get started.
Good.
So this is the world famous Giorgio Rizzoli, who's totally awesome. You read about him in the Dispatch on Sunday, if you had any brains. And he is the director of the Center for Automotive Research, which has the coolest acronym, CAR. And you came from Michigan, and they have a car, but our car is better now that you're here.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. And he knows everything there is to know about electric vehicles and cars in general, and all the student projects over at CAR, and world famous guy.
So if, in fact, this is an open invitation, I don't know if the class is interested or not, but we always are happy to do tours. And if we do a tour, I'll explain a lot of things about alternative fuels, electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and we get to see them as well. So that's something that could probably best be arranged at the end of the day. You know, I don't
Okay.
mind the 5 p.m. tour, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
So take a poll. If enough people are interested in the class, I'm happy to do it. We just have the rest of the semester. So
I
whenever-
predict people will be interested.
Good.
Just a wild guess. I know I would.
Good.
Yeah.
good.
All right. We'll
So,
make that
happy
happen. I'll
to-
get out of your way.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. And the subject, you know, one of the many topics that are related to sustainability, of course, is transportation. And you will see in a few minutes why, but just if you want to capture it in a nutshell, transportation is important because of the energy use that is made in our country and really worldwide. Transportation represents something in the neighborhood of between 30 and 40%, depending on where you are. So it's a really important element of the sustainability picture. So what we're going to do today is start with a little bit of background. And I know that I gave a lecture in the previous version of this class, but this one is fairly different.
Oh, good.
And here is a picture that represents population density in the world. So the higher, the darker the color, it gets into a sort of purple, the higher the population density. So no surprise that some parts of Europe, a lot of East Asia, the Indian subcontinent, Brazil over here, and even some parts of the United States, look at the LA basin there, okay, are pretty highly populated. Here's another picture. If you could, this is a virtual image, if you could somehow find a way to take a snapshot from up in the sky, you know, and it's night everywhere at the same time, those lights represent a measure of the electricity consumption in the different parts of the world. Look at how bright the eastern half and the west coast of the United States are. Europe is pretty bright, Japan is very bright, China is getting brighter all the time, India is getting brighter all the time. So if you now superimpose the two pictures, you find something really very interesting, which is that there are big parts of the world where there is very little correlation between population density and energy use. You might at first say, hey, you know, energy use, population density, the two things have to go together. But look at Central Africa. Not many lights are on there. Even in parts of Western China, you don't have too much in the way of bright lights. So how does that work and why? Well, this picture is an interesting diagram that actually has a third dimension. You can see two immediately. The third one will become clear in about 60 seconds. So you have primary energy consumption per capita in gigajoules. And on the horizontal axis, you have the gross domestic product per capita. So this is joules versus dollars, okay? And you shouldn't be surprised to find that there is some kind of a proportional, almost linear relationship between economic prosperity and energy use. Shouldn't be too surprised to find out that the US is off the charts. And Russia is kind of off this, well, do you have any idea about why Russia would be out there? The answer is really trivial. Because it's
Cold.
darn cold out there. That's as simple as that. Okay. But what you notice here, and here's where the third dimension comes in, is that there is actually, the individual countries are not represented by a dot, but it's a line. And the line is time. So this is the historical evolution of economic prosperity and energy consumption. And if you look at, pick Ireland, for example, look at where Ireland has gone over the past 50 years or so. Look at South Korea, same thing. South Korea went from an industrially developing country to an industrial power today. So that kind of trend is easily understood today in 2013, and it poses the question, what happens when China, which is already marching along, as you can see, India, Brazil, Mexico, and so on, begin to develop, and they've already began to develop that way, in the same way South Korea or Ireland have done. This means that as China becomes economically more prosperous, then they will consume more energy, because with prosperity there come all of the toys and gadgets and appliances, etc., automobiles. So this is an interesting question, because if I look at a group of countries that in the automotive industry are known as the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, let's do some arithmetic. Let's see, China about 1.3 billion. India is about 1 billion. Brazil is probably pushing 400 million. So you add all of these countries and you end up with something like 3 billion people. Okay. And so there's 3 billion people who 20 years ago had very low energy consumption. 20 years from now, their wish is to live like us. Whether that's a good idea or not, I don't know, but that's their wish. And transportation has a phenomenal impact on this, because as I said in the very opening, transportation is a significant energy consumer. And look at this, China tripled the number of cars they drive, and therefore their needs for gasoline, in just 4 years. Now, over the same period of time, number of cars in the US grew by about 10%, but as you will see, what is happening in the US is cars are actually becoming smaller and more efficient. So the US is actually consuming less petroleum. China, on the other hand, is on the rise. So let's take a look at some numbers for energy consumption. So China overcame the energy consumption of the United States in around 2008, 2009. We had a bit of a dip because of the recession, but look at that. There is no slowing down. We are here. The projection is that China will continue to grow at that rate. Whether that's possible or not is part of the discussion today. And India, on a lower level, but also shows a similar trend. Where does this energy come from? Worldwide, again. This is from the Energy Information Administration. By the way, if you're curious, and you should be, what you do is you look up EIA, Energy Information Administration, and you will find more information than you could possibly digest. It's a really rich source of valuable information about the science, the economics, the policy related to energy. So, liquids. What does liquids mean? It's mostly petroleum. Okay, there are a few other liquids that we use for energy, biofuels and so on, but petroleum is really a big part of this. Coal, no surprise there. Natural gas, renewables down here, and nuclear. And those are projections. Again, I repeat, we're around here, and the projection is that the world energy consumption is expected to grow at this pace. At least demand will grow at this pace. So let's talk about these liquid fuels, because as you will see, I think automobiles and liquid fuels kind of go together, okay, still. But look at where liquid fuels go. Transportation is the largest consumer of liquid fuels. Industrial uses are significant, and buildings and electric power are minimal. Today, we really don't power power stations with oil anymore. We used to, but in the US, this only happens pretty much in New England. Okay. So, of the liquids, as I said, oil is the dominant, petroleum is the dominant component. And again, this picture should not be a surprise, but that's where China has been. And now I'm not looking at projections, I'm showing you data over a 15-year span that is behind us. So look at China, look at India, and look at the US. Now this is growth in percentage, those are not absolute numbers. But you notice that the growth in petroleum consumption in the US is really very small, and actually over the past 2 or 3 years, I think that number would be negative. So, let's talk about the US a little bit. It's too difficult to approach all of these problems from a worldwide perspective. So, first, history. I love history. And we should all love history, because there are some parts of history we don't want to repeat. So, 1850. In 1850, the United States energy supply was 90% coal. Wood. 90% wood, right here. And 10% was coal. So in the pre-industrial revolution days, we basically made do with wood. Then the Industrial Revolution came on, and the steam engine was invented, and we started having these big, powerful machines. We even started producing electricity a little bit later, and coal became by far the dominant component. Somewhere around the late 1800s, we learned how to harness the power of water, so hydroelectric power became important, and it's remained percentage-wise roughly the same for the last 100 years or so. And then oil came. Someone drilled a hole in the ground, the dark stuff squirted out, and even though it smelled bad and it stained everything, they figured out what to do with it. And so oil became a very important part of our economy, and gas, natural gas, kind of comes with it. The two things, oil and natural gas, are related to one another. Then in the late 60s, early 70s, nuclear made its appearance, and it has a pretty steady fraction of our power generation. And then there is a tiny little sliver in pink at the top, and that's renewables. So if one wanted to be pessimistic, one would look at this picture and say, oh, okay, that's renewables. All we have to do is go about 99, we have 99% of the way to go. In fact, hydro is not so bad, okay? It's not 99, it's 95% of the way to go. Okay. Now that's the historical picture. Let's now take two snapshots in recent times. This is a series of graphs that I've been collecting for years. Every year a new one comes out. I don't have 2012 yet, but 2007 and 2011 are the two I have chosen here to show you the big picture. So on the left-hand side, you have the supply, the energy supply. Biggest chunk in 2007, you can't read the numbers, but it's roughly 40% was petroleum. And let me get to the percentage thing. What are the units here? The United States used 101.5 quads in 2007. What's a quad? Do you know what a quad is?
Quadrillion BTU.
Excellent, thank you. This is an informed crowd. So, but I want to put the emphasis on the Q word, quadrillion BTUs. You know, it's a staggering number. Okay, so 100 quadrillion BTUs, give or take. So the number of quads that appears in these slides, in these pictures, is actually close to percentage. So allow me for a 1.5% approximation here, okay? So 40% petroleum. What's the next biggest one? Natural gas, 23.6. Coal, 22.7. So those are the top ones. The next biggest one is nuclear, the red one, at about 8.5%. After nuclear, you have hydro, 2.5%. Then you have solar, wind, and geothermal, which together are about 2/3 of 1%. Okay. Biomass, I forgot. The biomass actually has become, in the last decade, more important than hydroelectric power, so that's a good thing. So that's the source. What are the uses? Well, the uses of these primary sources of energy, if you really want to group them into the two biggest categories, are electricity generation. Okay? And electricity generation has got a rainbow of different primary sources that go to feed it, because it's coal, it's natural gas, it's hydro, it's nuclear, it's solar, it's wind, it's geothermal, and yes, a little bit is petroleum, but one observation we make immediately is that petroleum is not very important with regard to electricity generation. And that's about 40% of the total. So 40% of the primary energy supply this country uses goes to make electricity. So turn the lights off, please. Now, what's the other biggest chunk? Sure, you have residential, commercial, and industrial uses, which are a mix of different fuel sources, but when you go to transportation, which in the US represents about 30% of the total energy use, what feeds transportation? Well, of the 30%, 28 is petroleum. There's some electricity, there's some biofuels, electricity mostly rail transportation today. There is some biofuel, there is some natural gas, but they're almost anecdotal today. That was in 2007. How have things changed? Well, in 2011, we went down a few quads, okay? So we were down to 97.3 quads. I'll still use the 97 equals 100 approximation for my calculation, but petroleum has now become 35%. And when you look at the 2012 numbers, it'll be even lower. So our petroleum consumption has decreased, but transportation is still very heavily dependent on it. Biomass went up by actually a percentage point. That's significant with the numbers we're talking about. Natural gas went up, it's almost 25%, and that in 2012 will be up again. Coal down to just under 20%. The other numbers are similar. Solar kind of doubled, but 2 times almost zero is still a small number, okay? Hydro, nuclear, those things are fairly constant. Wind went up too. Wind went over 1% in the span of 4 years. So, the good news is that we are making more use of renewables, but it's still a small percentage relative to the total. How small a percentage is it? Well, when you look at the composite and you include hydroelectric in renewables, which is the correct thing to do, we're up to about 8%. And by the way, I travel to Europe fairly frequently, and I talk about energy and automobiles when I visit Germany and France and Italy, and they tell me that in the European Union the numbers are not that dissimilar, actually quite similar. So, and petroleum is still the single largest fraction, 37% of the total energy consumption. That 37%, the majority of it, as we saw, goes to transportation. So what are the energy challenges that we face in the U.S.? This material comes actually from a U.S. Department of Energy presentation. Actually, it was given by the executive director of ARPA-E. But anyways, the point is that we have energy security issues because a significant fraction of the energy is actually imported from other countries. There is an issue of competitiveness. If some technologies are going to be very important in the future, for example, energy storage, batteries, okay, where is the U.S. technologically with respect to global competitiveness in that technology? And environmental impacts, that's a whole other discussion by itself, but environmental impacts of our energy supply are significant. And environmental doesn't just mean emissions. Sure, emissions are an important part of it, but you also have water usage, for example. And so these are things that one really needs to worry about. So the United States Department of Energy tends to think of the energy issue in our country in terms of this simple matrix. So on one side, you have stationary energy production and energy for transport. And by the way, the two of them together represent about 75% actually of the total energy consumption. So if you solve these two problems, you're in pretty good shape. And then you have the issue of energy supply and of energy demand. And on the supply side, what do we need to do? Well, we need to make electricity cleaner. That's a mandate, really, and you will see some numbers, but you understand that today electricity is produced mostly by burning coal. And for transportation, on the other hand, we need to deploy alternative fuels and finding alternative hydrocarbon fuels that are renewable in some fashion is an important mission as well. On the demand side, well, we better make more efficient use of what we have. So increasing building and industrial efficiency is a very important thing. And of course, on the vehicle side, same thing. And I'll talk about the efficiency mandate called corporate average fuel economy in a few minutes. So in between, when you look at the intersection of supply and demand, what do you have to do on the stationary side? We need to modernize the grid. In a sense, I have to confess that I'm embarrassed when I travel to Europe to say that I'm a citizen of the United States because our electric power grid is actually quite embarrassing in many respects, okay? And on the transportation side, electrifying the vehicle fleet, making vehicles hybrid, plug-in, or even battery electric is something that certainly will remove petroleum from the equation, or at least significantly reduce its use. So these are sort of the goals that the Department of Energy has set for itself. Let me talk briefly about CAFE rules. So recently there has been a proposal, and that has been accepted after some compromise by the automakers, to significantly increase the fuel economy standards of vehicles. And so if you look at the fuel economy in miles per gallon, the proposal that is being implemented right now, we've started doing it, would have passenger cars and light trucks go from something that might have been of the order of 20 miles per gallon in 1980 to something that might be respectively 60 and 40 miles per gallon in 2025. That's important. And of course, one of the ways you can achieve this is to have smaller cars, and other ways by having more efficient powertrains. Another goal that the US Department of Energy is to double renewable electricity generation. The tough part about electricity generation is that we deal with such large numbers. The quantity of energy that needs to be converted into electricity is so large that even if today we double renewables, it's still a small fraction of the total. But in particular, what the government has done recently, in agreement with the automakers, has been to implement a new set of standards called corporate average fuel economy standards. I mean, the CAFE standards have existed for a long time, but there's a new standard now. And it works this way. Automakers are challenged with increasing, you see here is a reference in red, is the 2012 Toyota Prius. That's the reference. And so what the automakers are challenged to do is to use that as a starting point for model year 2012, and then increase by roughly 3% a year the fuel economy of automobiles for the foreseeable future. Why are some of, oh, and by the way, the important thing is, why do these curves, first of all, look like this? They look like this because it's recognized that the size of the vehicle has a profound impact on fuel economy. So these standards are not across the board. So a small car in 2016 would be expected to get 42 miles per gallon, but as the size of the car increases, down to the largest car, you would be expected to have comparably lower numbers. Still much better than what they are today. So part of the compromise on the part of the government was to agree with the automakers that you cannot have a single standard, but that it has to do with the size of the vehicle. And why are some of these lines dotted? The reason is that 3% a year increase, compound interest, you must have learned something about compound interest at some point, okay? That's a pretty tall order. It's not a small increase. So the first year, 3%, well, you know, you replace some steel with plastic, move a few things around, tune the engine a little better, and you get your 3%. The second year is going to be harder. From the third year on, it's going to be a real challenge. You have to make dramatic changes in these vehicles to achieve those kinds of gains. So what the auto industry and the government have agreed to do is that they will revisit all of this in 2016 and decide whether these targets are reachable and achievable, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a few more words about the CAFE standard that explains a little better how it works. You will have these notes so you can read those words. But the point is that the demand side, the efficiency of the transportation fleet is an important concern, and it is being addressed. By the way, we deal with automakers every day, whether it's Honda or General Motors. We talk to them all the time. We do research projects with them. And I can tell you that this fuel economy mandate is not too bad for those of us who are in the research business, because there is so much to do. From reducing engine friction, to improving aerodynamics, to improving engine combustion efficiency, to reducing weight. There's so much that needs to be done. So we're pretty busy these days. So, petroleum has fueled transportation for 100 years. What next? So first of all, I have a quiz. What's this car in the middle? Anybody know?
Is that the Model T?
Yes, it is. Very good. In a sense, it's the most important car in the history of the world, because the Ford Model T is the car that made mass production a reality. Henry Ford imagined this idea that someday everyone could own a car. And so there were two things that Henry Ford did. One was the $5 a week wage for auto workers, and the other one was the Ford Model T. Of course, he was no fool. He was paying his workers enough so that they could buy Ford Model Ts, right? So, but that car is important because it created a completely new concept of an automotive industry that was actually directed at the masses, not at the few. So petroleum. What's the situation with petroleum? In 2010, petroleum played a very important part in the US economy, in the sense that if you look at the difference between demand in million barrels per day, so that's millions of barrels per day consumed in the US, right around 20 Okay, so at the end of this lecture, 55 minutes, you have a homework assignment. How many barrels of oil did we use in the US for transportation while I was talking? Okay. The number will surprise you, it's pretty large. So that's what we want to use. And this line down here represents what we actually produce in the US. And the US actually produces petroleum, okay? That production, this number actually has gone up in the last couple of years. So the difference in dollars and cents is $1 billion a day. Okay, so that's what it costs us to feed our thirst for petroleum for our automobiles. China, interesting. Oh, and by the way, when was the last time that the US produced enough petroleum to be self-sufficient? 1951, 52, okay, thereabouts. Take a look at China. China production has been increasing steadily, and China production is this one, I have it right, and China demand has been increasing steadily. So the year when China exceeded its domestic supply of petroleum was 1995, but I can tell you that in 1995 there were not many cars in China. Okay. Today the situation is quite different. So China today has a $400 million a day petroleum habit, but I'm sure that this is 2010 data. We're in 2013. I suspect that that number has gone up. Japan is in a similar situation as China, but Japan shows us an interesting trend. First of all, Japan basically does not produce any petroleum. They have to import all of it. But look at consumption trends in Japan. Japan as a country has embraced vehicle hybridization and fuel economy more so than just about any other country. And that's the primary reason why. They really don't have the primary fuel. They have to import all of it. Oil imports in the US as a share of domestic consumption. Basically, this 50% mark, the yellow line that you see across at the top, means that we import as much as we produce. And you notice that imports have actually gone below 50% in the last couple of years, and I suspect that 12 will show an even lower number. So for the first time in a long time, the US is now importing less petroleum than it consumes. There was a time when we were pretty close to importing 60%. So if not petroleum, what? Well, biofuels. You know, anything that has hydrogen and carbon in it, and it's okay if there is a little oxygen too, makes for a pretty good fuel for an internal combustion engine. So whether it's gaseous or liquid, we can burn it. Let's concentrate on liquid fuels. So why are we not all using, instead of petroleum, ethanol, for example? Well, pretty simple. Today, the production cost of OPEC light crude is order of $20 a barrel. The market price on spot market of crude is about $100 a barrel. So, you know, we have a nice group of people in here, and if I tell you I have a business proposition, folks, we're going to have a 5-to-1 margin in this business. You want to go into business with me? Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the light crude. You were going to ask a question.
Oh, I was just gonna say, is another reason, like for corn, doesn't it take a barrel to make a barrel as well?
That
it's
is
like really
right,
close.
Right. Yes, I'm not sure that a barrel for a barrel is actually the right number.
pretty close
That's
to
a
that.
big debate, okay? But I will agree immediately that corn is not the right answer, so we'll get that out of the way quickly. And I'll go to that. So now look, you know, there are other forms of petroleum that are maybe a little more expensive. If you get it in deep water, it could be as much as $60 or $70 a barrel, but you still have a pretty tidy margin, okay? When you look at corn ethanol, this is just the economics of it, okay? The economics of it are that it is actually more expensive than the spot price of crude oil. So how can you possibly go into a business where you sell at 100 but it costs you 120 to produce? It doesn't make much sense. This reminds me of an old joke that people used to make about Chrysler in the 80s. Apparently some executive at Chrysler had said, or was reported to have said to the press, well, we lose money on every car, but we make it up in volume. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a good joke anyways. So that's where corn ethanol is. Now, is that the only biofuel? No, it's not. In fact, there is a brilliant example. Brazil has been a leader in this, which is sugarcane ethanol. And you can see that, yes, sugarcane ethanol is a little more expensive than petroleum, but the way Brazil has sorted out how to make it with bagasse, which is the byproduct of the production of sugar, is a very energy efficient, doesn't interfere with the food supply. There are lots of good things about it, and it takes less energy input. Therefore, sugarcane ethanol is, it's in play. Today, we're working on second generation biofuels, which do not use corn, require much less energy and water input. And the problem is the investment. Who is going to invest in full-scale plants that make these biofuels? Because the dimension that you have to, there are pilot scale plants, but when you think about the sheer size of a plant that will produce enough biofuel to even make a dent in our consumption, it's really quite impressive. So who's going to make that investment? Is it going to be Shell or BP? Should it be the federal government? Is it going to be an agricultural and food company? It's an interesting question because the investment is huge and the risk is still high. So the U.S. Department of Energy is promoting and helping launch pilot scale production in hope that there will be sufficiently attractive economic outlook that someone will make the investment. So biofuels, I think the answer in general is yes, it's a good idea, but you also have to deal with the economics of things. How about electricity? Sure, why not? We'll talk about the positive side. Electricity is here. We have electricity in every home, every building, it's present. If you do a calculation about how many cents per mile it costs you to drive a car, driving on electricity at the price we pay today in Central Ohio, it's something like a third to a quarter of what it would cost with gasoline to drive a car. So the economics are attractive to the user, but there are challenges. Challenges are that electric vehicles are expensive because batteries are expensive. They're limited in range. Refueling time is long. So here I have to do one of my favorite sort of numbers. I'm a back of the envelope numbers kind of guy, sort of an old-fashioned engineer. If you can't do it with a couple of multiplications, then it probably is not worth doing. So when you fuel your car at your favorite gas station, you are moving in time a column of fluid. This liquid, gasoline, has a certain energy content, right? So many BTUs per kilogram or whatever. Megajoules per kilogram is probably a better unit to use. If you have energy, which is the content of this liquid, moving over time, let's see, what's energy over time? Energy per unit time. Power, thank you very much. So when you're holding the fuel pump at the gas station, do you have any idea of how much power is kind of flowing through your hand? Okay, any have you ever thought about that? Probably not. So it's something that you could go back if you went to look at the energy content, megajoules per kilogram of gasoline, and if you figure out how many seconds it takes to move a liter of gasoline. These are all things that you could estimate pretty quickly. You would come up with the following number. You are holding a hose that carries 80 megawatts of power. Now, electrical engineering professor, is 80 megawatts an impressive number?
Yes, I'm impressed.
Okay. All right, that's what chemical stuff does, okay? So 80 megawatts in your hand. Today, when people talk about level 3 charging for electric vehicles, which would be the fastest charging, the biggest number that anyone dares to propose as something that could possibly be done is 80 kilowatts. Okay? And I don't think you would want to hold in your hand an electrical cable that is carrying 80 kilowatts. Even though it's well insulated, you probably have a lot of respect for that cable, okay? So the point is that in the electrical world, 80 kilowatts is a really big number. And by the way, you couldn't do it at your home. I mean, it would take a special transformer. This is an industrial size supply, okay? But when you pump gasoline, there you go, 80 megawatts, you don't even think about it, okay? So when people talk about, oh yeah, electric vehicles range, we need better batteries. No, we don't need better batteries, because if they get too much better, then you need to refuel even faster, okay? So, I mean, sure, we need better batteries, but that's not the answer for electric vehicles. It's not that simple. Refueling the electric vehicle will always be a significant challenge. And how about natural gas? Well, if you haven't heard, if you live in Ohio and haven't heard people talk about natural gas, then you must live in a cave or something, because this has been one of the hottest topics. And these are projections for production of shale gas. And here are some numbers about projections of the production, increasing production of unconventional gas in the United States. So the U.S. is a major energy producer, and shale gas is going to be a big part of that. You know, there are a lot of environmental issues and a lot of economic issues related to that, but natural gas will play a more important role in the future. So we've gone through petroleum. We still have it. This is not a talk about peak petroleum and all that. There is still quite a bit of it. Biofuels, we know how to make them, but we don't know how to make enough to deal with like 10, 20 quads of energy, okay? Electricity is there, and so what else is there? Well, if all else fails, we may have to go back to the way things were before 1850, when wood was the primary energy source. So this is the first part of my talk, and I have a short second part that is going to focus more on the concept of plug-in electric vehicles. And the picture that you see in the background is the EcoCar that our team of our students has developed. They're students from mechanical and electrical engineering, material science, industrial engineering, business, communications and marketing, and it's a team of students that competes. Competition is for US and Canadian universities. We're one of the best. We finished second in the last competition, so second is the worst possible finish you can have, right? And we were very close to first too. So they're working really hard to do better this year. So this vehicle is the old EcoCar. There is an EcoCar 2 based on a Chevy Malibu platform that is being developed right now. If you come for a tour of car sometime in the month of late March or in April, it will still be there. Then in May they have a competition. So after early May the vehicle is gone. So plug-in electric vehicles, really a quick bird's eye view. These are numbers that are approximate, just to give an order of magnitude, but take an average car, 30 miles per gallon, 400 miles per tank. Okay, that's what you get. Make it hybrid, and the 30 becomes 40 miles per gallon because hybridization reduces fuel consumption. And you still get your 400 miles, but you have a 30% reduction in petroleum use. Okay, make the vehicle plug-in. Battery pack is larger, and some of the range of the vehicle is satisfied by the electrical supply. Well, you could still get your 400, so Chevy Volt would be the was the first commercial example of this, but now you're looking at something like 70% reduction in petroleum use. The extreme would be to have a plug-in hybrid vehicle that doesn't have an engine. Well, we call that a battery electric vehicle. So your petroleum use reduction would be 100%, but now this is a representative number. Actually, a lot of automakers are wishing they could get 100 miles today. That's what you get with a charge. So it changes the mode of operation of your car for two reasons. The range is different, and the refueling process is different. Even if you had infrastructure everywhere, you'd have to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to get a fast charge. I'll stop for lunch. Fast charge for an hour, okay, and then keep going. That's viable, but do you want to have lunch every 100 miles? I mean, that's a lot of lunches. Okay. One of the things that is neat about plug-in hybrid electric vehicles is that they're more intelligent in and of themselves, because there is so much that you have to decide. Do I use the battery? Do I use the engine? How do I use each of them? But in addition to that, what if you had information about where the next charging station is, what the traffic conditions are, what the weather is? You also have geographical maps and all that. We're doing a really neat project with Ford. In fact, when this lecture is over and back to car, we have a group of people coming from Ford this morning to talk about these things. And we're doing work on doing cloud computing solutions to send information to cars on how to have the most efficient, make the most efficient use of their fuel. It could give you advice, the cloud would solve large optimization problems and send information back to the car saying drive at this speed or take this route instead of that one, with the goal of in real time giving you information on how to minimize your engine consumption. Really cool things. That's on the kind of cool car side of things. How about on the power grid side? And by the way, in case you don't know, Ohio State has a really good group of people who work on electrical power systems, the grid, electric machinery. This is, I think that this department has made a good investment in hiring a lot of good people in recent years. So what's the picture of a plug-in car? What does it look like to the electric power grid? Well, I'll summarize it in the words of an executive from American Electric Power who was with me, a guest at a panel. We both spoke at a panel here at Ohio State a couple of years ago. And he said, look, from our perspective, electric vehicles, plug-in vehicles, are very much like what happened with air conditioning in the 1970s. When the country sort of moved to centralized air conditioning, the electric utilities had a new load that was, sizable, and we had to adapt to it. Well, electric cars are very much the same way. Yes, there are a lot of details and complexities, but there is nothing inherently difficult about satisfying the energy demand of plug-in vehicles. You have to do it right. So one of the concepts that is important to understand is what is the periodicity of the electric power grid demand. And typical plot over the span of 24 hours, or 48 hours in this case, it would look like this. You have a peak, and that big peak at the very top could be something that might happen maybe only in the summer when it's very hot and everybody has the AC on. But then at night, demand goes down significantly. So the concept that has been well understood by a lot of people is that if you could find a way to fill in this valley and shave off the peak, this would help in many ways. It would make your grid more reliable, easier to manage because you wouldn't have these huge power fluctuations. And at night, when no one needs power, and maybe at night is the time when you have more wind power, for example, you could use that power to charge vehicles. It's a good idea in principle, but the implementation of it has some interesting technical challenges that a lot of people are working on, and there are a few very good people at Ohio State who are working specifically on these problems. But really, when you look at the colors here, and you look at this picture here, you ask the question, where does that power come from? We know that it's X% coal, Y% hydro, and so on. But it's used in a very special way because hydroelectric power is not something that you can modulate and control very easily. So it's part of what is called the base load. In other words, it keeps coming, it's steady, okay? So it's always on. Nuclear, similarly, you're not going to play too many games with trying to modulate power output from nuclear power plants. You like to have a set point and you run them a set point. So that's part of the base load. The next one is coal fire. Well, coal, you can get varying degrees of output from a coal-fired power plant, but it's not quite as easy as revving up the engine in your car, okay? Then you have the gas-fired combined cycle systems, which are much more flexible. These are gas turbine generators, and those are much more flexible, much easier to turn on and off. You don't turn a coal-fired power plant off, okay? You just don't. You may kind of lower its output, okay? But the gas-fired ones, you can actually turn on and off. Yes?
You had said that, the goal is obviously to try to smooth it out, but adding cars isn't going to smooth it out. It's just going to fill in the gap at the bottom. If everyone's charging their cars overnight. In fact, I would think that it would probably significantly increase and you'd have another peak.
Your observation is good. I had a few other things in mind that I didn't say, but I'm going to say them now. So first of all, yes, electric vehicles are going to increase the average, okay, because demand is going to increase. So point number one, that increase in demand is not that big. Okay, it's measurable, but it's not as if you were to increase electricity demand by say 10 or 20%. It's not that big. Okay.
If you swapped out, let's say you swapped out petroleum for for electric, it wouldn't be that big? Is that what you're
Now,
saying?
so here's the number. Today, the US has, in principle, on paper, enough electric power generation capacity for us to turn, this is in principle, the implementation would be a nightmare, okay? But in principle, we have enough capacity to take 70% of the existing vehicles in the US and make them electric.
For how long though? Because if we have that much capacity and you're rolling all these power plants except for hydro and nuclear, whose life depends on, you know, staying consistent, you're going to have significant, you know, they're going to be overworking the
So
the turbines and turbines
that,
and stuff.
yes, that's true. And so the answer to that question is regional. So California is at the edge of brownouts. The Midwest has gobs of power.
Right. Okay.
So
So
the
that's how-
answer,
that's how
so
it's-
so here, even if everybody went to electric vehicles,
We
in
would be
principle,
okay.
we wouldn't feel it. California is at the edge, but the important message though is that we don't need to build a large number of new power plants to feed the electric. Now, here's the other part. So vehicles, yes, they would bring up the average, no question. The other component that is absolutely essential for the electric power grid is energy storage. Because if you were able to manage solar, wind, okay, and peak production, you could keep a certain type of power plant running at a steady level, but at night you are storing that energy, and then during the day you don't need to turn on a peaking unit because you can recover it from the stored energy. How do you store the right amount of energy? Because this is really a lot of energy. And so the answers are that certainly batteries are a way that is being used and considered, but it's kind of hard to get batteries in the tens, hundreds of megawatts range. Okay?
And to last very long.
So pumped hydro is a very common way of doing it. So basically you pump water back up the hill at night, and underground compressed air storage is something that is also beginning to be, you have to have the right geological condition, but basically what you do is you pump air, you compress air in an underground basin, and then when you release that compressed air through turbines, you make electricity. So, so energy storage is a very important part of the grid. So your points are all well taken. Now, today we're talking about penetration of electric vehicles that doesn't even approach 1%. So it's really not a big issue yet. But it would have, all of this has to be worked into plans for the smart grid. So let me make a couple of comments briefly about CO2 emissions, because one of the questions that has to be in the back of your minds is if electricity is made by burning coal, and by the way, in the US, about 50% of our electricity generation comes from coal nationwide, is an electric vehicle cleaner or dirtier than a gasoline-powered automobile? And the answer these are average answers, okay, based on fleet data, but there's a lot of calculation behind these numbers. If you look at the CO2 in grams per kilometer, roughly speaking, this is the number for a 25 mile per gallon car. So this would be a pretty big car. 30 mile per gallon car, 35 mile per gallon car, 40 mile per gallon hybrid vehicle, okay? So you can see that CO2 emissions are directly correlated with the fuel economy of the vehicle. So let's say that this is an Escape hybrid right here, okay? Now look at next to it, the column next to it. This is an EV that is fueled only by electricity generated from coal. So the CO2 emissions of that EV fueled by coal are comparable to a reasonably good hybrid today. Okay. But in the US, our mix is such that we have hydro, nuclear, natural gas, and coal. Those are the four major contributors. And when you look at the US energy mix, it turns out actually that nationally, on average, the CO2 emissions of an electric vehicle are lower. So in general, EVs are reasonably good from a perspective of CO2 emissions.
What is this number accounting for? Just emissions, not like production of batteries and all that kind of stuff?
This is the CO2 emissions that have to do with the energy, primary energy conversion.
Okay.
However, because the cost of production of manufacturing is spread over many vehicles, when you look at the numbers of what the CO2 emissions are of the manufacturing plant, of the battery production plant, those are small numbers compared to this. because this comes out every day from every car, okay? So, you know, if you do life cycle analysis, you take all of that into account, and there are people who are expert in doing that. Okay, good question. Now, the point here that I wanted to make is that the electricity generation mix is a very important part of the story. So, coal in the US is 50%, natural gas is about 25%, oil is still used a little bit, this is nuclear, and then you have renewables and hydro. Okay, so US coal is about 50%. If you look at China, 80% coal. China is building a new coal-fired power plant a week, which means also that they're desperately looking for coal. Australia has a lot of coal. In fact, they export coal to China. There is Australia, about whatever, 55, 60% coal. So now look at France. This is coal in France, a sliver, okay? Nuclear. France made that decision in the 60s, okay? So an electric vehicle in France is about as clean as riding your bicycle, okay? In China, in fact, we've done some, long story, I'm involved in a project with China, with Chinese colleagues, and we've done some analysis, and actually increasing introduction of electric vehicles when you do complete life cycle analysis is actually increasing CO2 emissions in China today. So how about the sun? Another area of strength in this electrical and computer engineering department is photovoltaics, right? So why not? Doesn't that look like a great picture? You come to work and you plug in under the sun. Well, I'm sure that Professor Anderson will recognize some of the names. Brilliant PhD student from this department. I happen to be a co-advisor, and we did some really nice work on doing a detailed analysis of photovoltaic recharging for electric vehicles, including economic analysis. And the answer is this: you could get 68% reduction in CO2 emissions with a completely reasonable grid-connected solar charging system, where you're not expecting to get 100% of the energy from the sun. You account for the fact that you have cloudy days and all that, so you're grid connected. You can also sell back to the grid. So all of this was calculated into the analysis, and the reduction in CO2 emissions is spectacular. So why are we not doing it? It's the same old answer. It's very expensive. And it's very expensive because we don't have any explicit cost. We do not assign an explicit cost to CO2. So part of a paper that we recently published in the journal Applied Energy has to do with the impact of carbon taxes. So what kind of carbon tax would make this technology viable today? Because if you actually had to pay for your CO2 emissions, you would think twice before doing certain things. And I'll just close with a couple of comments. If you have not, by now everybody I think has seen Chevy Volts around. I have some interesting numbers. This is data, operating data from the car driven by the wife of one of our employees. And basically, your gasoline equivalent consumption is something like 105 miles per gallon. And this is a car that is being used correctly. This woman bought the car knowing that her commute to work was of a certain length. So this is a pretty well used vehicle. For its intended purpose, it's the right car. But if she goes on a longer trip, no problem. I've driven the Volt. I've had it for days, actually. I had loaners from GM. It's a real car. You can't say anything about it. This, on the other hand, is a different animal. This is a Tesla. And if you have $110,000 and want to buy a toy, you should not be allowed to have this much fun with a car. This thing will do 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds.
No.
Okay? Yeah, it's Lamborghini-like in its acceleration. So, anyways, and so that's the end of my story for today, and I close with this proverb, which I think tells a lot. I think it's something we need to think about. Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you much.
Great. Questions?
Professor Rizzoni, I'm actually a mechanical engineer, third year, and so I just took the systems class and saw the presentation on compressing fluid and fluid pumps, and I was wondering what's the efficiency of pumping water, hydro up and having it coming down? Because we saw a lot of the pumps, at least in our homework pumps, were 90% efficient, but how efficient would it be to take electricity and pump up the...
Let me just, I'm going to give you some round numbers, but you have to first of all, pump it up. And so you're going to have efficiencies that are related to that, but you have to put energy into it. So it's not just the efficiency of the energy conversion, it's how much energy input you use to move that water up. So from an efficiency perspective, you could say that the hydraulic systems, and then you have an electrical generator that is going to produce the electricity. You start multiplying efficiencies, and maybe the overall round trip efficiency might be something like 70% if you do things pretty well. But it's not just the efficiency. The point is that you're actually using power at night to move the water back up. And so what makes this system work, the pumped hydro, is not the energy equation, because from an energy perspective, you're actually probably spending more energy than you're getting back. Okay, in fact, remove the probably, you're spending more energy than you're getting back. So why do they do it? It's the economics of it. People want to buy in the day; they don't give a hoot about the electricity at night. There is a discipline in the mechanical engineering energy systems called thermoeconomics, which is a mix of thermodynamics and economics. And the laws of economics are allowed to violate the laws of thermodynamics. Okay, so it's really the dollars and cents that dictate that. It's not an energy efficient way of doing things.
Is pumped hydro very widespread?
Yeah, where it can be done, it's done. Because again, from the perspective of the utilities, it makes sense. They need to have that power capacity during the day, so it's worth their, and at night they have to run the plant anyways.
Yeah.
They're not going to shut it down. So yeah,
Do you think other countries are going to adopt electric vehicles faster? I mean, because France, it seems to make sense for them because all their energy comes from nuclear.
yeah.
Seems like they would probably
France
do
is
it first.
going in that direction. In fact, I was in Paris for a conference in October, and I noticed that they had a system that was Zipcar-like. Okay, you become a member of a club, and they had electric cars in Paris that you could rent at different places and drop off at charging stations. So I think France is moving a little faster than the U.S. Germany is taking it quite seriously as well. So I would say that in Europe you will see more of it. The country that has embraced it in the most intensive way is China, because China has the opportunity to leapfrog. The way they're thinking about it is if we become really good at making batteries, at making low-cost electric motors and power electronics, we can become the world supplier of this technology, and at the same time we can remove ourselves from the petroleum equation as much as possible. So China is very aggressive. The problem with China is that their electricity is 80% coal.
Right. And I guess their other way that they're going to leapfrog is they haven't built their infrastructure. I mean, they're just building
Correct.
it now.
Correct.
So they can build it at the
Yes. Yes, that is
The
exactly
right
that is
way.
exactly right, and that is true both for the electrical system, let's call it recharging infrastructure. It's true for their power plants as well. Today, if you were to tell AP, make a low emissions power plant with CO2 sequestration and all that, the amount of time it takes to get a project like that funded and approved, it's unbelievable. China puts it in their 5-year plan and they do it. So today, a lot of the experimentation, it's part of this China USA project of which I'm part. A lot of experimentation is being done exactly in this direction with clean power plants. A lot more development is being done in China than in the US today.
Well, what is happening in the way of charging? You said that's our major problem, and I agree, it's definitely a major problem. What is the next generation charging? Like, how fast can we actually do it without
So-
damaging the battery?
Sure. So charging, first of all, forget level 1, which would be your 110 in your garage, because when I had that Tesla for a long weekend, man, it after 12 hours overnight, it wasn't fully charged yet. Okay, so 110 is no go. At 220, you can get. Today, I think the maximum power level that is standard is 6.6 kilowatts. So do the arithmetic this way. If a Nissan Leaf has a 24 kilowatt hour battery and you never use 100% of it, so give me a discount. Let's say that you use 20 kilowatt hours and you have 6.6 kilowatts, that's a 3-hour charge, okay, which for a lot of users is actually pretty good. The High-level charging would be something where instead of taking, it would be charging at a rate greater than 1C, meaning that if you have again, a 24 kilowatt hour battery, your charger would be 50 kilowatts. So in principle, you could recharge in half an hour. And so those are sort of the three things that people are looking at. So I said 80 kilowatts earlier, but 50 kilowatts is a number that is being considered. The problem is that for 50 kilowatts, you need to have a special transformer. So when you go to the gas station, there's going to be an electric station with its own transformer where you can do a 30-minute. But can you imagine the lines? I mean,
Yeah.
okay, there are lots of problems. Okay, it's not that simple.
So I didn't hear you mention the idea of you drive into a gas station and you swap a battery.
Right. That's something that requires a degree of standardization in batteries that is not compatible with the state of the battery industry today. Someday, that'll happen.
You think that will? Because I mean, batteries degrade at different,
Right.
differently. You would have to have a large, an enormous storage facility with the different degradations of batteries, so that you're getting similar performance. Based
Well,
on
you,
what
you
had.
change the whole box, okay? So you get a box, and what the state of that box is between one charger and the other is not going to change. I mean, you basically would be guaranteed a certain minimum level of performance. I think that that's an answer, solution that would make sense for fleets. There are applications where something like this could make sense. I don't think that's going to be the widespread solution that will solve everyone's problems.
How about the used car market with electric vehicles? Because your most expensive component is your battery. And if you're having to replace it, I just bought a car that's 11 years old, and if it had batteries, I'd be up a creek
You
without a paddle.
wouldn't have bought it, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very good question, and so this is another. But the jury's still out on this one because Toyota Priuses have been around for over 10 years now, and they have a pretty good record. But the reason why the Toyota Prius has a good record is because a battery pack this big, you only really use about 20-25% of it. That's why those batteries have long life. They're oversized. In a pure battery EV, you couldn't do that. And so the question is, in the future, I think that if battery electric vehicles are going to be a successful enterprise, eventually, there'll have to be something like a leasing program. You don't own the battery.
Like a cell phone or something like
Exactly.
that. Gotcha.
You pay for the use. But if you did the correct economics for that today, you couldn't afford it. Yeah. So it would be like doing international roaming all the time on your cell phone. Someday, yes.
Is there like a specific tipping point you see in the automotive industry that's about that? Like they just need this much larger battery to be more economical. They just need this plug-in higher power or quicker power to the battery charging, or they need to find this biofuel that's going to be actually cheaper to make than actually you can sell. Do you see one thing in the near future, 10 years, 15 years, that's going to be a tipping point to revolutionize the automotive industry?
I don't think
carbon
it's
tax.
a good question, and I think the answer is no. Because the way the auto industry thinks today is that any one of these solutions, compressed natural gas, biofuels, battery electric, plug-in electric, all of these things are actually going to be in the mix in the future. And the reason is that the answer as to which is the best technology is so regional that you can't really have one silver bullet. So I think the automakers are all capable of doing all of those things. And which mix works best for which market that's what they are trying to figure out. So I really honestly don't think that there will be a silver bullet. If you ask me 30 years from now, you will see gasoline fuel cars, diesel fuel cars, compressed natural gas, biofuels, electric. I mean, they will all be there. What fraction for each? That I would not venture to guess. But the internal combustion engine reports of the death of the internal combustion engine are greatly premature. Okay, it's not. They will be with us for a long time. What you put in it is a different story. I better go.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Good questions, guys. You're hot.
I told you, it's good
You're
class. Can I
hot.
get the slides real quick?
Sure.
Thanks.
I really like the Tesla. I think it's a fantastic car. Some of the S, Model S is.
I have heard great things. I haven't had it. I will soon drive it because a friend of mine owns one. So he's the guy. He's the same guy who loaned me the Tesla, the Tesla Roadster. Is this the one? No. I'll get it. I'm just have to find
Oh,
it
I can
quick.
stop the recording now.
Yeah. Let's see. What do we have? This was in my aging files.